G'day mates, it's Busta here. And as you guys may have probably guessed already, yep, it's your boy, Raid Shadow Legends. But seriously though, have you guys played this game yet? If you have been, and as you can see here in my own gameplay, most of us get thoroughly owned by the clan boss, and I could seriously use some help slaying this glorious hunk of a salt farmer. I've been leveling my champs and managed to reach level 60 with one, and I'm almost onto my next 60, and it's been great playing on my PC while I'm editing stories and whatnot. It's also been pretty cool chatting with some of you guys over the in-game chat box throughout the day as well. I've also enjoyed as of late trying to get through the spider den, and I'm up to stage 8 now, which is about halfway I think, but my favourite thing still has to be the arena. Learning about how each hero synergizes with another hero, along with trying to pick the correct battles to take, has been a huge learning curve, let me tell you. But I think I'm just starting to get the hang of it, and have finally reached silver rank, which is good. The game, as I mentioned, is now on PC, and also runs across devices, which is awesome. They also have this new Battle Pass event where you can win awesome prizes, including energy refills, gems, upgraded artifact sets, a new epic and legendary champs, and even more than that by fulfilling the daily and weekly challenges. Oh, and if you want, you can join my clan as well. I recently kicked a few inactive people, so others can join. But be quick and stay active because last time it filled up really quickly. The clan name is called Nutters, with the tag NU1. And you can also find me in-game under the nickname Busta, or one word, if you want to try and catch me there sometime as well. So, go ahead and download this game. Go to the links in my description box, and if you're a new player, you can get 100,000 silver and a free champion, the Hexweaver. Now, take a look at this cool champ that you'll get for free as well. You'll also find your extra rewards here in your inbox for the next 30 days only. And I hope to see you guys in there. Back during the summer of 2017, I was a very stubborn teenager, and I had no car or driver's license at the time, so my way of going to my friend's house, or anywhere in general, I would always walk to my destination. Occasionally, my brother would drop me off at the locations that I would want to go, but most of the time it was just me and myself walking alone. The city that I live in isn't too big. It's known for its gangs though, and drug problems as well. Now, one afternoon I put my earbuds on and walked out of my house to go and meet my friend at the local park, which was an additional 15-minute walk. My neighborhood is actually a gated community, but there's 2 doors to enter and exit from. One of them leads to the main street and the other leads to an alley behind a sort of middle and elementary school. But to make the scenery creepier, the schools used to be a part of a historical Japanese cemetery. There were rumors about paranormal activity and cult activity happening in the area. My mentality at the time was pretty naive, and I just sort of brushed it off as rumors. Anyone would assume that it was probably just gossip, right? The neighbors saying anything to get the neighborhood kids to go in their homes early. But I take the door to lead me to the main street, and as soon as I cross at an unmarked crosswalk, I bump into a guy wearing a long red hooded robe. Not the ones people use after taking a shower or a cover-up or something. It was legit, like the stereotypical cult robe. I made eye contact with the guy for just a second, and I noticed his eyes were pitch black. I mean, he absolutely had no pupils visible. My first thought was, wow, this guy must be super high on meth. In this city, everyone is pretty much always on drugs, and it's pretty easy to identify what a person is on. But in this case, that was the contrary. On his lower left eye, he had a tattoo with a pentagram symbol. He looked like he was maybe 25 and was really tall, at least 6'1". Through my loud music blasting, I can hear his heavy breathing. It sounds pretty abnormal and like some strange growl that I've never heard before. But we just sort of passed one another, and that was pretty much it. About a week passed by, and I completely forgot about the creepy encounter that I had with the satanic guy, if I'm being honest. My friend calls me, though, one Friday afternoon and tells me to come and hang out at her house to smoke ourselves stupid and enjoy a six-pack. As my usual routine, I put on my earbuds and I walked to my destination. Nothing out of the ordinary happened during the day, but I get to my friend's house and we have our sesh, our get-together. After a few hours of drinking and getting high, I decided to call it a night. Not being aware at the time for a while, I finally realized just how late it was and I left the house in a hurry. It was 11:30. I had my earbuds on as always, and I get to the beginning of the back street or the alley, which is the second entrance to my neighborhood. And as soon as I passed the end of the elementary school, I had a really unsettling sinking feeling that I was being watched. I honestly felt like a deer trapped knowing that there was a predator around. Now, I always carry some sort of a weapon due to terrifying predicaments that I've been involved in the past. I won't go into detail about them here, but suffice it to say that I learnt my lesson. Anyhow, on the right side of my waist, I pull out my double-bladed pocket knife. Every person who's owned a pocket knife knows the clicking noise that it makes when you open it. My knife made the clicking noise that it was supposed to. As I get closer to the parked cars, I stopped in the middle of the road where the last streetlight is lighting. I look ahead between the cars, and at the second entrance, there was a guy in a black robe crouched behind a truck. I keep walking in the middle of the road, just because I'll have enough time to make a run for it if need be, and the strange guy emerges from the truck, breathing heavily. Instantly, too, the breathing reminded me of the encounter that I had last week during the day. He walks up close to me, and we make eye contact again. And this is when I noticed that it was definitely the same guy from last week. I easily identified him because of his under-eye tattoo. This time, though, he stood there just sort of staring at me like I just ruined something for him. He saw the knife that I was holding in my hand. He stares at it for a couple of seconds and walked away breathing heavier than before. I want to emphasize, too, that his breathing sounded sort of animalistic. Well, I start to power walk to the entrance at this. In utter horror, I turn around to see another man emerge behind from another vehicle, but I get there and I close the door behind me quickly and hide by the closest yard. I stay there for about a minute, trying to process what I just encountered. I get on my phone and was about to call my friend in a panic when I suddenly heard a conversation going on behind the wall that I was hiding. I overheard a man's voice saying, "Dude, why didn't you just go for it? It was an easy target." I hear a different voice speaking up saying, "She had a knife on her. It was going to get messy." And after that, I ran home, terrified. When I arrived, my dad obviously noticed that I was frantic. I tell him that nothing's up and I'd seen a possum creep up on me. That's why I was in such a scared mood. Amazingly, he believed me, and I haven't told any of my family what had happened to me. And even typing or speaking about this situation just gives me the chills. To this day as well, the thought of not carrying a knife really terrifies me, and only God knows what the heck these cult members were really planning on doing that night. I personally believe that these guys were planning on trapping an innocent person and doing something sinister for sure. But anyway, I guess the moral of the story is always be packing some heat. For reference, I work as a barista in a coffee shop inside a larger store. I'm one of a handful of male baristas at my shop. I'm gay and very open about this. I wear pride shoes, I have a pride flag attached to my name tag, and I have a couple of wristbands with rainbows and phrases like Orlando Strong, and a local LGBT+ center. So, the other day I was working my shift at the register, and a gentleman comes up to me and he smiles. I think that he noticed the pride flag on my name tag, but he didn't explicitly mention it at first. He says that he doesn't know what to order and asks me for my opinion. Now, I'm not particularly a coffee drinker, but I know what drinks fit with taste, so I ask him what he likes and try to give him recommendations. As I'm talking, I can tell that he's paying more attention to me than to what I'm saying, which I'm completely okay with. He was a shorter but well-built man, had beautiful eyes, a nice beard, basically the perfect DILF. Eventually, he decides on a super sweet ice drink that we have, and I go to make it for him. As I'm making the drink, one of my co-workers leans over and whispers, "Hey, I think that customer just took a picture of you, man." That was a bit of a red flag, I'll admit, but I thanked her and kind of brushed it off. I give him his drink and he smiles. He points to the pride flag and says, "I love that flag. Where can I get one of those?" I laughed and said that I got it from a pride event that I went to a few years ago. He then said, "And where can I get the person it's attached to?" I immediately feel a rush and I start blushing, but trying to act professional, I brush it off again. He eventually takes his drink though and sits at one of the tables. I continue going about my day debating whether I should give in to this guy or not. Every now and then I would glance at his table to see him looking at me, and no matter when I looked as well, it seemed like he was looking at me. It was at this stage too that I started to get that weird feeling of hard eyes with red flags. Then I noticed that he hasn't taken a single drink out of his coffee. Remember too, it was an ice drink, so I could see the clear plastic cup. When I have a break and I go to wipe down some of the tables, I stop by his table and ask if he didn't like the drink, and if not, I could make him a new one free of charge. He hands me the drink and mentions that he's not sure if it's too sweet for him or not, and asks me to try it. I politely decline, telling him that I don't drink coffee. He's shocked and asks me why I'm working here then, and blah blah blah. As we're talking though, his questions start to change. "So, do you lift at all?" No, not really." "Well, how much do you think you could lift if you had to?" "Well, the job requirement is 50 pounds, so I guess at least that much." "Well, I've learned that it's good to be able to lift at least half of your body weight. How much do you weigh?" Immediate red flags go off. There was something about the combination of the drink and the two questions that made me feel like I was being asked how much of a fight I'd be able to hold, especially if I was drugged. I've been drugged at a party before as well, and these things are red flags that I've learned to pick up on. So I kindly and sort of quickly end the conversation and go back to cleaning up tables. As the hours go by, he continues to sit there not drinking his drink. Other employees and a couple of managers ask if everything's okay, and he says that he's perfectly happy. Every now and then he takes a phone call though, and at one point I could have sworn that I could see a guy on his phone at a different part of the store talking opposite of the guy at the table. And suddenly, I start to feel like there are more eyes on me than I first realized. I pull one of my managers to the back and tell him that I'm getting weirder and weirder feelings about this guy, and the manager says that we'll keep an eye on him. Now, I was closing on this shift, and so we got closer and closer to closing time, and I noticed him still sitting there. When the announcement that the store is closing in half an hour was made, he comes up to the counter and asks if he could walk me to my car after I get off. I tell him that our closing duties take us at least 45 minutes after we close, and he says that he'd be happy to wait. I politely decline at this, and he asks when I work next. I tell him that I'm off for a couple of weeks after this, and he says, "Well, then I feel like I should walk you to your car at least, especially if I'm not going to be able to see you for a couple of weeks." No way, though. I politely decline, and eventually he finally leaves. I finish my closing duties and head to the employee area. As soon as I get down there as well, I tell one of my managers about the situation and ask if I can take the side exit from the store. At our store, we exit out one of the main doors after we close, but there's also a side door that we use to get into the building before we open, and that the managers use to get out after we close as well. He agrees and tells me that he would walk me to my car to make sure that I'm okay if I'm cool with waiting a little while, and believe me, I am. So I walk out the side doors with a couple of managers. I get into my car, and as I'm driving, I see a large van with extremely tinted windows parked in front of the front door. Now, there's no way to know for sure if my customer was in that van, and if it was as ominous as I thought it was. But what I do know is that I wasn't about to stick around to figure it out. And that night, I took a very long and winding path back home. This all happened a few months ago. Me and 4 friends, we were all 13, were sleeping over at my friend's house on a Saturday night. We all got to his house around 4, and eventually we decided to go to the McDonald's that was about 30 minutes from his house. After arriving at the McDonald's, we ate our food, went to the shop for about 15 minutes, and then we left. It was around 5:30, I would guess, when we decided to go to the welfare shop that was near this shop. And now, in the UK, anyone who lives here will know that it gets pitch black at around 5:30 in the winter, so it was pretty dark out. We get to the welfare though, and it was either a 20-minute walk around the housing estate that we were by, or cut through a forest which would take about 10 or 15 minutes. Naturally, we decide to cut through the forest, and we're all just kind of joking around, sort of pushing each other and stuff. And around 5 minutes before we get to the other side, we all heard a twig snap to the left of us. We started laughing at my friend letting out a slight scream. We all thought that it was probably just a small rodent, like a squirrel or something. But we're about to keep on walking when we saw our friend just frozen, staring into the woods. We all told him to hurry up, but he just didn't move. The 2 of us decided to go towards my friend to see what the heck he was staring at. Looking back now, though, I really wish that we walked around the housing estate, because what I saw will never, ever leave me. And I hope no one will ever have to experience this too. So I saw a man just sort of stood there, staring at us, not moving. My friend took his phone out and turned on the torch and aimed it at him. And what we saw was just terrifying. The man has a knife clenched in his teeth, with the knife going through the side of his cheek. Blood was dropping down his chin and on his clothing and on the floor as well. And we just lost it, screaming and running, trying not to trip on the mud or the bottles on the floor. When we reached the end of the forest, we were all red-faced and shaking, and then we all walked back to our friend's house, just reflecting on what happened. We went on to have our sleepover in the end, and we had a good time, except for the fact that we all kept thinking about what happened. We never did tell anyone about this, and I hope that whoever that guy was got the help that he needed. So for those of you who aren't really aware, funeral homes have small apartment spaces in them. Folks who work there, usually the owners, live there. But my uncle and I, because the owners are family friends and whatnot, my grandfather was part owner before he died, lived there rent-free and even worked there. The living quarters were pretty much a college dorm, a 1-bedroom, 1-bath with a living room and a kitchenette. And now, my uncle was showering one night and I had to take a serious dump, but this was a few hours after we had closed. The month was October, and for some weird reason, death just always seems to be more present around the end of the year. I only say this as well because all my life, when Pawpaw, and yes, I called my granddad that, was alive and worked there, he'd always be busy from October to around Valentine's Day. So we had a couple of bodies in the dressing room and one that the owners had embalmed in the embalming room. I'm trying to be discreet about the whole FH business thing because I'm trying to be as respectful as possible about it. So anyway, I'm like this close to just taking a dump in my pants, so I decide to use one of the toilets in the FH. I walk through the garage and enter into the back hallway where only employees are allowed, and immediately I see this big black shadow-looking humanoid thing standing guard outside the door to the embalming room. Have you ever played Kingdom Hearts before? You remember those heartless things that were in the game? Well, it looked pretty much exactly like that, but just no antennae on its head and very ridiculously tall. It turns its head and looks at me, and then it runs away from me. It then crouched in a fetal position in the corner at the other end of the hall, and when I went to that corner to talk to it, it just disappeared before I could say anything to it. And well, after that, I held my number 2 until the next morning. The next thing that happened there was in January of 2016 one night. It was an unusually uneventful day at the funeral home that I worked at. People had died and we held services all the week before, so that day I decided to just clean the place. The day still went on, and when everyone left and went home at 5:30 p.m, I went to the back of the FH into my apartment. I knew that I was on call that night, so I didn't make any plans. I sat with my uncle and we just ate some food and watched Hellboy on Sci-Fi Network. We went on to bed when it was over, but I stayed up a bit, and at about 11:45 I decided to hit the hay. Now usually when I got body or death calls, they would come well past midnight, so I was surprised when the phone rang before I could even shut my eyes. I answer it, and it's my boss. He tells me that the cops had found a guy that had been down for a few days. It's a decomp, FH talk for decomposing. So I put my suit and tie back on and I await my boss. He arrives and we load up in the hearse and we drive way out to the sticks where this dude lived. He was old and frail and the early stages of decomp were beginning. He was easy enough for me and a cop to lift on our own, and we put him on the stretcher and my boss and I then leave. When we get back, we put the body in a body cooler so that the JP and the MEs can look at him. Boss leaves and I go back into my living space. And then the air just immediately felt like there was no oxygen. I got ready for bed and just like that I fell asleep. It was weird too and was definitely not normal. But I have a dream. And in this dream, me and the guy that I'd just picked up are best buds. We go watch Star Wars Force Awakens. It had just opened. But then I see him in his cooler. He looks at me and just starts laughing at me. I ask him what he's laughing at, and he says something that I can't hear. I ask him to say it again, and he says, "I'm gonna kill your family." I woke up immediately, drenched in sweat, and I was in so much pain, it was unbearable. And it was that night that I typed my letter of resignation and let it print from the Wi-Fi printer so that my boss would see it first thing in the morning. I was terrified by that dream, and the experiences in this place were just too much for me. And I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. In early 2014, I was 18 years old and started browsing the world of Craigslist. I responded to an ad in the personal section and started texting this woman. Now, being 18 and unfamiliar with how Craigslist works, I didn't see any issue with meeting up with her at a Red Roof. I also didn't see anything wrong with her asking for donations. Again, 18 and stupid, I know. I figured donation meant optional. Again, stupid, I know, but just to be clear, she never gave me a price, and nor did I tell her that I had money for her, so the whole thing was just sort of a weird set of circumstances. But I set up a time to meet her. I left my house to head to my GED class as usual, but walked to the Red Roof instead. It was pouring rain and it was warm out, so by the time that I got there, I was all drenched and sweaty. I knocked on the room door that she was in, and she answered. Her attire should have alerted me straight away, but let's say it again, 18 and stupid. She invited me in, and I asked to use the shower quick, so I get undressed in the bathroom and I hop in the shower. She started taking off her top, and I told her, "That's okay, I won't be long." So she goes and waits on the bed, watching Steve Wilkos. Eventually, I get out of the shower and wrap a towel around my waist. I came out of the bathroom, randy as a dog, looked at her and asked if she was ready. She sprawled out on the bed and says, "Donations are due up front." At this point, all the red flags should have gone off, but I just didn't realize the situation that I was in. My face dropped as I faced the TV, and I nervously told her that I didn't have any money. She got up and started screaming at me and threw my clothes and my bag at me. I got dressed and actually apologized for wasting her time. So I leave her room and I start heading back to my GED class. Before I was out of the parking lot, though, a guy in a green punch bug calls me over to him, and I tried to ignore him and walk past until he shouted to get my attention. So I walk up to the driver's side of this guy's car and he starts talking to me. Now, this guy looked sketchy and I just figured that he was the woman's pimp. So he's talking to me with his left arm up on his door and his right arm down at his side, holding a pistol no less. At this point, I'm almost certain that I'm about to get shot. He says to me though, "So why would you come here knowing that you don't have any money?" I explained as calmly as I could that I wasn't aware of the situation. And then this guy pulls his arm up a little to show his gun, and he says, "Listen, man, I have messages between you and her saying that you had money for her." Now, like I said earlier, I never told this woman that I had money. So this guy decides to lower his gun and says to me, "Man, you are lucky that you came to see one of my girls. Other girls would have stabbed you with a broken crack pipe. Look, I can see that you're pretty young, so I'll let you off with a warning this time. But don't you do this again, alright?" He then motioned me to be on my way. And you can bet your butt that I kept looking back to make sure that I wasn't about to be shot from behind. And obviously, after that, I never met up with anybody from Craigslist again. When I was in 3rd grade, there was this girl in my class. She wasn't particularly liked by anyone, as she was quite the bully and overall a rude person, even to adults. She was known to have anger issues and get mad at people for what seemed like pretty much no reason. I was no exception. Her name was Carly. She had been mean to me in the past, but that didn't deter me from going to her house one day after she had been nice to me all day at school. Naive, I know. So, before leaving school that day, I called my mum to ask if I would be allowed to go to Carly's house, and she said yes, and to call her when I got there so I can give her the address. When I think back about this too, I always wonder if she had a bad feeling about the situation, since she doesn't normally ask for the address, and she isn't picking me up since Carly's house was about 2 blocks away. But when I got there, after calling my mum of course, Carly insisted on making me look pretty, aka wetting my hair and brushing it. I let her, and then she told me to close my eyes and that she was taking me to the living room. So I closed my eyes and she began to guide me towards the bathtub. We were already in the bathroom, so the tub was a solid 2 feet away from where we were standing, and I opened my eyes just enough to see where she was guiding me. My foot hit the side of the tub and I said that this didn't feel like the living room, and she said that it was and that I just need to step over the gate. I tell her that I know that this is a bathtub, and she stops trying to get me into the bath and brings me to the kitchen instead. She then says that she's going to make some cereal. I was standing behind her when she reached into the dishwasher and said that she was grabbing a spoon. The way that she clarified that she was going to grab a spoon immediately told me what she was really about to grab, and it was for sure not a spoon. I can still remember the feeling of dread that overcame me when she said those words as well. She then pulls out a large knife and backs me up into a counter, holding the knife only inches away from my neck. I can't remember if any words were exchanged during this. Maybe I was just too shocked to say anything. But I only stayed there for maybe 30 seconds before I just pushed her aside and ran towards the door. I grabbed my backpack and put on my winter boots, and by the time that I put my boots on, Carly was trying to block the sliding door. I pushed past her again and flung open the door. I ran down her patio steps and out her front gate, not bothering to close it. Obviously, I just wanted to get home to where I was safe, and I remember her yelling at me as her dogs escaped through the open gate, but I didn't care. One of her neighbors who was in their front lawn waved and smiled at me, clearly oblivious to what had just gone down. I ran down the road into my house, not stopping once, and it wasn't until I was in the door of my house that I just broke down. I began to cry and yell for my mum, my 2 older sisters yelling at me to shut up. My mum walked over to me and immediately knew that something was wrong though, so I explained what happened and she was very understanding and very freaked out as well. I can't remember if it was the same day or the next day that I had to talk to a police officer about what happened. He asked me what kind of knife it was and whatnot. I think my mum relayed most of the story to him because I don't remember having to say too much. But they got in contact with Carly's foster mum, and Carly got in huge trouble for it. At school, Carly yelled at me for getting the cops involved and tried to guilt trip me by saying that her mum threatened to put her back into foster care if she did anything like that again. I told her that I didn't care. The school was also notified of the situation, and the teachers made sure to keep an extra eye on her, but that didn't mean that I wasn't paranoid about her. I made sure to keep my guard up for the rest of the school year, that was for sure. I always thought that it was a bit extreme to involve the cops, but it did end up making Carly never mess with me again, so for that I'm grateful. I ended up moving after that year for unrelated reasons, only to move back before I started 6th grade. And the first day of middle school, I was waiting for them to call my name so I know which class is my homeroom when I hear an all too familiar name. And yep, it was Carly. I watch as no one goes up to join the class. Was she not here? Next, I was called. I go up to join the class that she would have been in, and I found out later when the teacher was doing attendance that she had moved 3 hours away just before the beginning of that school year. It's been 3 years since then, and I can only hope that she never comes back. When I was 15 years old, I had my grandmother make a doll that looked just like me. If you've watched the movie Caroline, then that's where I got the idea. I love the doll as well, and always kept it in my room. Fast forward to when I was 17, I had a friend come over to my house. We'll call her Amy, and Amy was into spells and chants and considered herself a witch. She wanted to do some sort of a ritual that required herbs, candles, and dimly lit lights. So we went downstairs to my room and I let her do her thing because, well, I was curious. She said that she wanted to connect to her spirit guides. I was open to the idea, but I wasn't 100% convinced that anything would happen. A few minutes into her chanting, I started to feel a cold chill, but I blew it off as me just getting a little bit spooked. A few minutes later, I started getting a sort of sick feeling, so I told her to just stop it. I didn't want to do this anymore, and she insisted on finishing, but I told her that it was getting late and I was ready for bed. We went back upstairs and fell asleep in the living room watching TV that night, and the next morning we met up with some friends and spent the day in town. Another friend took Amy home, so I went back to my house alone. When I got back home, it was pretty dark, and I took my shower and went to my bedroom. I decided to call one of my other friends, and while I was in the middle of talking, my doll, which had been sitting on my window for months, began to slowly slide down. And it was as if someone had their hand on it and was just sort of carefully moving it. It slid so slowly as well that it was undeniable that somebody was touching it, and I started backing away from it until it finally hit the ground. And at that, I ran up those stairs and couldn't shake the feeling of someone watching me for the rest of the night. For weeks on end, I didn't go back downstairs, and I slept in only my sister's room that was upstairs. But once I got the courage to go back downstairs, I smudged and saged everywhere. I also put my dolls elsewhere, even though I never thought that the doll itself was the problem. But after that, I never had a strange experience in my room again, thankfully. It's now been about 7 years since that happened, but to this day I still get goosebumps talking about